Did you apply for residency or a green card because you were married to a U.S. citizen and you're going through the adjustment of status process? And then once you file, you realize that your interview was waived and you're so excited? Well, hold on, wait a minute. This video, I'm going to take you through some really, really critical things that you need to understand if your interview was waived. It's not the best news ever for some of you. Hi, thank you for joining me to talk immigration. My name is Andrea Shev, if you don't know me already, and I'm an immigration attorney in Los Angeles, California in the United States. I've been doing immigration law for over 20 years, so I know a lot about this area. And I have put together this channel for you to give you clear, concise, and easy to understand information about tons of different topics on immigration. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about something that is so important and it's brand new because of new changes in policies that USCIS has put into place. So if you are out there and you filed an adjustment of status application in the United States because you married a US citizen and you're trying to get your permanent resident card and your interview was waived, you need to watch this video. I'm going to go through with you a few really, really important things that you need to be aware of if your interview was waived for your permanent resident application. All right, so your interview was waived and you're so excited because you're like, I don't even have to go in front of the officer to do an interview with my partner and I can get my green card issued. Well, for some of you, it might not be that exciting of news because what's happening is if your interview was waived, there is no one-on-one contact with the officer in person to be able to explain your relationship, to be able to provide joint documents, in order to have a conversation, in order for that officer to really observe you and your partner together. So everything is done through paper. And you know how that is. When someone does something through paper, then the subjective analysis of the information and the evidence that you give them is really hard sometimes to really gather the information that they need in order to make a really good determination on your case. Every couple is different. Every relationship is different. And sometimes it's so much easier to be in front of an officer, making the discussion, showing them, talking to them, having them ask questions, than doing it through the mail, through just an evaluation of your application along with some of the joint documents that you sent in. So don't be so excited necessarily that you got the interview waived because maybe your particular case is not really conducive to not having an interview. And that might be something that's going to cause a problem moving forward. Now, the officer always can call an interview after you send in documentation, but nowadays, more and more and more, they are not doing interviews because it saves them time, it saves them money, it saves them a lot because they don't have to have officers sitting inside an office interviewing people all day long, every day to make a determination. So, don't get me wrong, it could be a really great thing for a lot of you, but it can hurt some of you. And the group that it's going to be able to, or it's going to affect the most, is individuals that have not been married that long when they file their adjustment application. Because this is what happens. Now that the interviews are being waived, when you file your relative petition, that's that I-130 petition, you have to submit with it joint documents. Documentation that proves that the two of you are actually married, that your lives have been intertwined financially and emotionally. So when you send in that documentation, the officer looks at that and then makes a determination, is this a marriage that was entered into in good faith? Is this a bona fide marriage and not a fraud marriage in order to get a green card? The problem is that we're dealing just with paper. There is no ability to sit down with you and have a conversation to make that determination. So, couples that have not been married that long don't have a lot of documentation to send in when they file their I-130, right? If I've only been married, a few weeks or a month or 2 months or even 8 months, I don't necessarily have a year's worth of bank statements. I don't have a lot of things that a couple that might have been married for 5 years would have to be able to turn in with that application. So it can be very burdensome. And this is what's happening. In order to explain properly, let me go back in time a little bit. to before they start waiving interviews. Before they start waiving interviews, when we filed an adjustment of status application, the I-130, we would only include maybe 1 or 2 small documents to show joint ownership or joint documents. Now we have to submit a lot because we know this is our one shot to show them that this is a bona fide marriage. And when we don't submit a lot, what happens to especially couples that have not been married that long, they get a request for evidence. And in that request for evidence, it says, can you please provide us documentation from the day that you filed until the day that they send the request for evidence? And they want tons of documentation. They want joint tax returns. They want bank statements. They want checking account statements. They want medical insurance that's joint. They want car insurance that's joint. They want anything that shows the interchanging or the interrelationship between the two of you, the commingling of assets. So with that being said, it puts a lot of pressure on you to make sure that you have all that stuff when they request it at the end. Because when we used to go into interviews way back when they had interviews, you wouldn't have to bring that many things. You wouldn't have to bring a year's worth of bank statements because the officer was sitting right in front of you and they could ask whatever they wanted. They can get an impression of the relationship. They can get kind of a feel of, do they need more documentation or do they not? They can actually, you can hand over your documentation and they can actually have a conversation with you about it. So if they had any questions or you can explain things. Now you can't do any of that. You just mail it in, cross your fingers, and hope that the officer understands what you mailed in and it was sufficient enough for them to be convinced that you have a bona fide relationship. So now that I gave you the bad news that don't be too excited that you had your interview waived, let's talk about some things you can do in order to be successful because of this new policy and what you need, what I suggest that you do if you're filing an application, especially if you are a new couple and you haven't been married that long. So one thing that is really causing a lot of issues for individuals these days, because the younger generation, is a lot of people are not creating joint accounts anymore, joint checking accounts, joint bank accounts, because they're keeping things separately. Now, that's fine. That is completely normal, and I'm not judging that at all, but unfortunately, immigration is kind of stuck in the past when couples would get married and the first thing they would do, usually in most cases, would be commingling their assets. They would go to the bank and open a joint checking account. They would get joint credit cards. They would buy a home together. All these things they would do together. But a lot of times nowadays, couples aren't doing that. They're keeping their separate accounts, having one joint account that maybe they pay into to pay some bills, or they just send each other money to pay for the utility bills or for the rent. And what happens is when they ask for joint documents and you don't have an active joint checking account or an active joint credit card account or home ownership of the two of you together, then it becomes a little bit problematic, especially in this vacuum of not having interviews, because you can't explain yourself. You can't say, oh, well, I have my account, she has her account, and we pay things this way, and that's why we have the two accounts, but everything really is commingled because we jointly pay everything together. But the way it looks on paper sometimes is that you're just roommates and you're not really married, and it might be interpreted as a fraudulent marriage. So my advice to you is not necessarily to force you to do joint accounts, but to keep this in the back of your mind when you're thinking about the documentation that you're going to have to provide to the officer at some point, either in the beginning when you first file or when you get that request for evidence, and they're going to want to see 8 months of bank statements or 10 months of credit card statements or 5 months of utility bills. They're going to want to see the documentation. And I want you to keep in the back of your mind to really consider opening some joint accounts and working together to commingle the assets for the fact of this process. Now, I'm not telling you to lie because you are a legitimate bona fide marriage, but you have to understand where they're coming from. So if you are adamant about keeping your assets separate when you get married, make sure you keep in the back of your mind, how am I then going to prove that we are financially intertwined, that our assets are commingled. You might have to take extra steps to do other things, like make sure that each other's names are on your 401ks as beneficiaries. Make sure that you have joint health insurance. Make sure that when you rent your apartment, you rent it together. If you buy a home, hopefully you can buy it together, or maybe have 2 trusts and those 2 trusts buy it together. Something that you're going to have to show that there is a commingling of assets. You might want to do a will or a trust that names and is very specific about the relationship and about how you will separate assets, or how you will give your assets upon anyone passing. You have to do things. You're going to have to provide extra affidavits from people in your family talking in detail about your relationship and who you are and how you met and the events that you were together at with that person. So you're going to have to do extra work if you don't have those basic traditional documents. So what I want to put out there to all of you when you are preparing for filing for adjustment of status, and especially if you're a new couple, you have to think of these things. Because now that you do not have the opportunity to go in face to face with another human being and explain yourself, you're going to have to find ways to do it on paper. And if you can't do it the traditional way, by commingling a lot of your assets and showing joint ownership of a lot of stuff, then you're going to have to think of other ways to do it, and you should start thinking about it now, because you need to prepare for when that request for evidence arrives, because it's going to arrive. Okay? One thing that I tell my clients always when they start with me, and their first thing is, I said, now that we're doing it differently, now that things have changed, you must, as soon as you get married, you must join things as much as you can and start collecting monthly bank statements, monthly savings account statements, monthly credit card statements, utility bills, anything that comes monthly with both your names on it, and stick it into a folder. So when the RFE comes, when the request for evidence arrives, you can just pull out that folder, scan it all, and send it in. So you don't have to then start scrambling, oh my gosh, I don't have enough joint documents. Start thinking about the joint documents and what you can do jointly now. The more you have, the better it is. And I'm telling you, pictures alone or one or 2 little things is not going to be enough. You need to have financial commingling and interconnection between the 2 of you, because that's what they like the most. They feel that if a couple commingles financial assets, then they're less likely to be seen as being a fraudulent marriage. I know it's a little bit old school. I know what you're thinking, but that's the way they think. All right, I hope that is helpful, and I hope that it doesn't discourage you, but it gives you the information that you need in order to be successful in your adjustment of status application. Okay? Don't hesitate to contact us if you need information, or if you need more clarification, or you need help with the adjustment of status application. We're happy to help. And thank you so much for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you all in my next video. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you next time.